I feel like we should leave right now because it's probably as good as it's going to get. So thank you so much, Senator Davis, for not just a wonderful introduction, but more importantly, the amazing work that you have done over the last several months, helping not only write this legislation, but without your leadership, there's no chance that it would have gone through and passed in the way that it did. And so we are so beyond grateful for your leadership, also your friendship. Brianna and I went to college together, so we've known each other a long time. So we've been in the trenches for a long time, and just very thankful for her willingness to step up on this front. As moms, this is something that's really personal for both of us. I have 3 kids. They're 10, 9, and 7, a 5th grader, a 3rd grader, and a 1st grader. So we are living education at our house all day, every day, and I know the impact that it has and the difference that it can make. And so we are so thankful that we were able to get this piece of legislation through. We have a lot of our other legislators here on the front row who this would not have been possible without their hard work. I get to be the one that goes out and talks about it a lot, but they're the ones that really dug in, and without each one of these individuals here, we certainly would not be in the place that we are, completing what I think is probably one of the most successful sessions that we have ever had here in the state of Arkansas, and very, very proud of the fact that we were able to pass such an important piece of legislation that I believe will truly transform education in the state for the better. And one of the things that we looked at and that we spent the last 2 years on the campaign was, what are the key areas that we can lean into that will fundamentally change education for students, giving quality access to every student across the state of Arkansas. And I really believe that that's exactly what we were able to deliver through LEARNS. Is it perfect? No. Is it change? Is it going to be difficult? Yes. But is it going to be worthwhile? And is it going to change the lives of kids in Arkansas? Absolutely. I am 100% confident that the work that these individuals did and the work that Secretary Oliva is doing now is going to fundamentally change our state and help put kids on a pathway to success. And that's something I'm unbelievably proud of. Over the last couple of weeks, as we wrapped up the first session, our state got hit with some pretty intense devastation. Tornadoes that ripped through central Arkansas and also came into East Arkansas. I know this community is no stranger to what that means when a tornado comes through your community and how it can impact your daily life. We saw that in Wynne, Arkansas, probably one of the most devastated communities in our state in a long time from a tornado, in particular the school. And I'm proud of the fact that Secretary Oliva and the community of Wynne have stepped up, and within a week of a entire high school being completely demolished, I walked through that school. They had 4 structures that were left that were usable structures, 2 12-person classrooms and athletic facilities. Outside of that, the high school didn't have any usable building space left. And within 1 week, they had students back in the classroom, back getting instruction, making sure that the students of Wynne are able to complete this year. We have seen enough students miss school over the last couple of years, and it was so important for the community and for the state for them to step up and get those students back in the classroom. And Secretary Oliva was there earlier today. I'd love for you to give an update, and then I want to save the bulk of our time to take your questions. But most importantly, thank you for being here. Thank you to ASU. Thank you to the members of our legislature that are here. And thank you to the amazing people of this community who have showed up. We want to make sure that we give you time to ask questions, and we can address any concerns that you may have. I'm so excited about what I think that this means for our state and the impact that it will have long after I'm gone, which I hope is not for a really long time. But I think this is something that has a generational impact. This isn't something that in 1 or 2 years, certainly we're going to see some immediate impacts, and that's amazing. But this is something that is going to live on for years, for decades, and really change our state and improve the education that each student here has. So really proud of that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Secretary Oliva, and thank you guys again for being here tonight.
So thank you, Governor, and thank you for your leadership and your vision and all the work that you have done to to say we can do better for the students here in Arkansas, and let's come up with a way to do that and put this vision of LEARNS, which was a blueprint, into policy, working with the legislature and everybody, and getting that across the finish line, which kind of leads us up to what are those next steps. And when we hear about LEARNS and we hear about this comprehensive approach to improving learning, I like to say it starts everything from cradle to career. It's a comprehensive approach to make sure that we have systems that are aligned, and that systems that are going to lead to positive outcomes for students. And when we can do that by investing in early education, high quality child care programs, making sure that students come to us ready for kindergarten, ready to learn, looking at students that are performing at third grade, making sure they're getting their foundational years being built upon so that they can be successful throughout their educational career. And then making sure that there's opportunities. This notion that one size fits all approach to education doesn't work for every family. It doesn't work for every student. So do we have pathways for students where they can to have an exit ramp and an on-ramp to higher education or workforce, or making sure that as students are earning high quality credentials of value, do they articulate to post-secondary opportunities? Do they go straight to the workforce with those credentials? This package, this LEARNS bill, is a robust approach on how we're going to improve learning and outcomes in the state. So as we navigate through the next steps, once that bill was signed, we made a commitment to the governor and the legislature and the citizens of this state that when we go through the rulemaking process and when we roll this out to support school districts, we're going to do that in a clear and transparent manner. So right after the bill was signed, our agency at the department met with every single educational cooperative. There's 15 formalized educational cooperatives throughout the state that are comprised of the school districts and the school superintendents, and we were able to hit every single one of them in about a 3 to 4 week time, where we met with every school district superintendent in their regions, in their communities, and we even added a couple additional stops along the way because there was a lot of questions, there was a lot of confusion, sometimes there was misinformation, and we wanted to get out and find out what can we do to make sure we get the implementation of this initiative right. So those conversations went very well, and we were able to meet with superintendents, and I see some superintendents here. I think they would all tell you that after we met and we saw the vision of how we're getting these systems aligned, they felt a lot better about this bill and about what we're trying to put forth and the conditions that we're trying to create. So when we brought that feedback back to our fearless leader here saying, hey, getting on the road, meeting with district leaders is really helping shape the narrative, or really helping us implement the policy with fidelity. There may be an opportunity to say, let's start meeting with communities, let's start meeting with stakeholders, let's start meeting with business folks, let's start meeting with teachers, let's go down to the next level and see if we can hear from them any questions and answer any questions, and then talk about next steps, because we know that this isn't one and done. This is a journey that we're all engaged on, and we're going to be on this highway for many years to come. So that spawned this opportunity to open up and do a town hall meeting and be directly here with the stakeholders. And before I turn it back either to Governor or Senator Davis, I do want to thank the university here at ASU for hosting this event on a beautiful campus, and the fine university establishment it is that has a high quality athletic program that makes sure they takes care of their bowling team is something that I'm always very happy to be a part of and celebrate with them here in person.
My brother graduated from ASU, but unfortunately for our family, academics weren't at the top of his list of priorities, and he actually selected ASU because it was closest to duck hunting, and he could hunt in the morning and still make it to class pretty much on time. So
You gotta have your priorities.
yeah, absolutely. We'll turn it back over to Senator Davis, and we'll start taking some questions.
Awesome. Okay, we have a few questions that some of you submitted beforehand, so we'll take some of those questions, but also just get questions that you guys have along the way. The first question we've got is from Brittany Call. Am I saying that correctly? Brittany, you've got a question about career and workforce readiness provisions in the LEARNS Act.
I just said that I want to hear more information about the career and work readiness for the LEARNS Act overall. That was just kind of my question overall.
Yeah, so there are several pieces, I think, that kind of tie into this. One, I think that our focus in education for far too long has been too much on only what does a child know and not what can a child do. And our goal, and when we kind of took a step back, was how do we help prepare kids to go either immediately into the workforce upon high school graduation or into a vocational or trade school, a community college, or a 4-year degree. And making sure that there was a pathway forward. So doing earlier assessments starting in 9th grade as a part of the Arkansas Learns legislation. One of the other things that I think is really important and something that we've seen great success in other places is a dual track diploma, which allows a student to actually, when they finish high school, graduate with certifications to go directly into the workforce. So there has been this kind of misconception for a really long time that if for some reason a student doesn't go to a 4-year university, then they are somehow less than, and nothing could be further from the truth. There are so many fields and such a high demand for students going directly into the workforce or going into a trade or vocational program. We love our 4-year universities, but that's not for every student. And so helping a lot of those students get on a pathway at an earlier age so they're going directly into the workforce. Number one, we have a huge demand for it here in the state of Arkansas, and we are not currently meeting it. When I traveled around the state for about 2 years on the campaign, every single business leader and business owner that I met with, and it didn't matter what part of the state you were in or what type of business they had, the number one thing that they said was they couldn't find and hire the skilled, qualified workers they needed fast enough. So we have to do a better job of building that workforce, and we think that those are some of the components that help do that, is by putting a lot of those kids on a career path at a much quicker and earlier age and letting them know about just some of the opportunities that exist in their own backyard. One of the things that I really like about the Arkansas Learns program is the community service component, is that it requires students to serve in their community when they graduate. Now, there are a lot of exceptions if a student works or needs a ride that allow those students to get a waiver. However, those students going into their community, partnering with business leaders, with mentors, it helps them get on a pathway at a much quicker age. They then know someone that they have seen in their own community be successful, and they have a connection point. And for a lot of students in our state, that connection point, that mentorship, that can be life-changing. So that's another one of the pieces that I'm really proud of that I think will help set kids up from a much earlier age. Secretary Levy, you may want to jump in on that as well.
Well, and what I think is great about the Learns bill is it really tasked our agency kind of in the K-12 space to do an audit, to get a handle on what programs are out there for students while they're still in high school, and then where can those students take those experiences and articulate them past high school if they go into the military, straight into the workforce, maybe they go to a vocational school, a college, or a university. And one of the things that we've kind of found, which is where I really appreciate Governor Sanders' vision and leadership, is she's even created a workforce cabinet that's pulling together all the cabinet level secretaries that are interested in this space to also have that same conversation. And with Learns, we're being tasked, and we're putting together a work group that's going to be representative of many stakeholders in this space, but we're tasked with creating a career technical education high school diploma, because what we're learning is that there's a lot of great high school programs that are robust, where a student can go through a program and accomplish what we call becoming a program completer, where they may earn a stackable credential or an industry certification after 3 years. We want to give them credit for that. And what we don't want to see is a student earn these advanced credentials and degrees and then try to transfer to a higher education institution and being told that what you earned in high school doesn't count here and you have to start all over again. And that sometimes happens, and that's not fair to students, and we need to fix that.
Yeah, and just to piggyback, one of the first things that we did on day one was to sign an executive order creating that workforce cabinet. One of the things that I found out very quickly, which was kind of astonishing, is that we have 6 different government agencies that specifically deal with the workforce. And I asked, well, how often do you all get together? Like, what's kind of the long-term plan? They said, well, we've never met. I was appalled. I didn't understand how 6 different groups of people who were tasked with literally the same goal had never sat down at the same table. So we quickly established the workforce cabinet and appointed a chief workforce officer who is part of the governor's staff and works directly with our cabinet leads to make sure that we are actually working together and talking about what's working, what's not working, having a comprehensive, streamlined process, which is something that had never existed before. There are so many schools that have these amazing individual programs where they're partnering up with a business in their own backyard, and they're creating this great kind of learning circle and putting kids into the workforce. However, that's the exception, not the rule. And we don't have a statewide approach to how we can replicate that, and that was something we really wanted to address and one of the catalysts for the workforce cabinet.
Thank you. The next question we've got is from Chad Neal. Chad, I think you had a question about measuring student success. I'll come over to you.
Yeah, I've already forgot what I asked, but I think I was interested in what the expectations were as far as our national growth numbers and when we could expect to see those numbers. Because not only from a better educated student body, I think it would attract bigger and better companies, employers that would want to come to our state, especially even families that are more education-minded. Obviously doesn't want to come to one of the states that is the last in the nation. So just kind of curious about what the expectations were and how soon we were going to see results and how we were going to measure those.
Yeah, my expectations are high because that's how I function, with very high expectations. You don't believe me? Ask the people that work on our team. Secretary Oliva can probably go into more detail on a timeline, but I expect that we'll see some impact immediately from a number of different things. And the literacy piece, I think, is one of the biggest and most foundational and important parts of Arkansas Learns. And I think that we should start seeing, after the first year or two, significant changes in our scores. The good news is that we have no place to go but up. The bad news is we have no place to go but up. And we have to make, and that's one of the reasons that this piece of legislation was so important, to be comprehensive and broad and not just tinker with the system, but frankly to flip it on its head. I'm like you, I'm kind of tired of Arkansas being at the bottom. I'm sick of being 48th and 49th and 50th in basically everything, especially when I know that we have the ability to be at the top. I know we're capable of being in the top 10 in all of the categories. We currently find ourselves in the bottom, which is why we had to fundamentally change how the system operated. I do think that we'll have some significant changes in growth quickly, but some of these things are going to take time. This problem didn't happen overnight, and we're not going to be able to fix it tomorrow. But we do have to make these changes, and I do think that we'll see some growth over the next year or two, but some of that may take a significant more amount of time as we see students coming through a new system starting from pre-K up.
Yeah, and first, I'd just say that I think you're right. If you're looking at recruiting businesses that produce high-skill, high-wage jobs, they're going to look at the quality of the education system, and they want to know how your public schools are doing. And I always like to remind people that this Learns initiative is about investing in local public schools. The neighborhood zip code schools should be the best and first choice for most of our families. How can we support these very hardworking teachers, very hardworking principals, very hardworking superintendents with the resources they need so that they can see improvement? And there's a metric that's a pretty good predictor of how a state's going to do or how a student's going to perform, and that is, are they performing at or above grade level in third grade? And what Learns does is really invest heavily in that early learning environment. One of the first things we have to do is get a snapshot of where there is even high quality early learning programs. And one of the things that we've definitely realized really quickly is that there are deserts and islands out there, that there are families that want to participate in high quality childcare, but there is no services within 30, 40, 60 miles of their homes. So we got to be innovative in our approach of identifying where these spaces exist and working with faith-based communities, civic organizations, school districts, educational cooperatives, businesses. How can we incentivize high-quality childhood learning programs to be in communities that have a value or a demand? And then what does voluntary pre-kindergarten and pre-kindergarten look like? Right now, the system was fragmented, it was broken, and there's 3 or 4 different maybe even 5 early learning childhood programs. But depending on who funds that program, depends on which agency oversaw that program, which is depending on the resources those programs received, which depended on the standardization of the expectation of what's going to happen in those programs and how we're going to measure those success. This bill pulls it under one agency, it pulls it under the Department of Education. We can set a common vision. It also tasks us with looking at how are we going to measure student performance in those foundational years of when students are learning how to read. There is a fragmented approach to how the state monitors student performance. So we want to give teachers real-time information on how their students are doing. We want to give that to principals, and we get that to superintendents. We don't have that system right now. It's going to take about a year to get that system in place because you got to do a competitive procurement, go through that process, but we're going to have that in place for the 24-25 school year so that we can invest sooner. The first thing that we know that works is the earlier we can provide interventions to struggling students, the better off their chances are getting caught up at that 3rd grade benchmark. But we also are going to be able to identify students that are ready to be pushed and be accelerated. I think a lot of time we focus on remediation. We need to flip the narrative to acceleration. We're going to give about 120 literacy coaches statewide to target those schools and school districts that need those interventions at a quicker pace. And we're providing access for parents that may say, well, our child might need some tutoring or extra help outside of the school day. They can get up to $500 in an account to procure those services. So to answer your question is early intervention, investing in those foundational years. LEARNS does that significantly, and that's something that I think this legislation definitely got right.
Why don't we jump out here and Senator Davis, if you want to pop around, see if anybody in the audience has a question. Happy to take one.
Any questions?
Somebody over here maybe, I don't know.
Yep.
Sure.
We were rolling around.
Yeah. We go here,
Okay.
and then we'll come to you next.
Oh, okay, thank you. I guess the first one, I have many questions. I guess the first one that I would want to start with is, and by the way, thank you for the LEARNS Act. Ever since I started education a long, long time ago, I felt like we needed to be working on the outcomes for our students and not what we've been doing. So I want to thank you for that right off the bat. As I look towards the future, and I see that many of our jobs are being replaced by robots, and looks like AI may be coming in to get some white-collar positions in the near future. And of course, as a hobbyist, I do build robots myself, and I actually just got sent a schematic where you can build a portable chatbot AI to carry with you that connects to Microsoft. So I'm left with the feeling like we need to be preparing our students to work with this, and at the same time preparing them, the safety aspect needs to happen, because we suddenly have a new thing that we have to devise a way to keep them safe from. And there's also a need for a new vocabulary when we deal with AI. Sorry, there's so much I've got in this.
No, the vocabulary, I think most of us are infinitely behind our kids when it comes to technology and their advancements.
But an example would be, when we say AI, that covers everything from your Roomba all the way up to the new chatbot AI, or whichever you might choose. It covers a lot of ground, so we've got to have designations of what is okay to work with, because sure, we should be teaching our children how to make Roombas, at least in high school or as far up as we can. How can we begin to implement that very effectively? I'm sorry I packed a lot into that somewhat rambling question I just asked.
I'm going to let the secretary jump in a little bit, but if you can teach my kids how to even just operate the Roomba or a basic broom, I would be totally on board with putting them in your classroom. But I do think that is one of the challenges that we have moving forward. Technology is changing every day, and our kids are growing up in a world that, frankly, none of us did. And so we're having to learn all the new technology. I mean, I had to convince my kids, showing them a picture on a flash card of a telephone. They're like, that's not a telephone, because they'd never seen a home phone that looked like that. They're only used to a cell phone. And so it's just a completely different world. But I think the safety aspect has to be one of the most important parts of it. I think that some of the resources and tools we have out there are absolutely amazing and can help us make life more efficient and modernize different things and help make basic tasks a lot easier. I also think that there are a lot of dangers that come with that. I think social media, while it's only a piece of technology, it is something that we need to be paying a lot closer attention to. It's one of the reasons I pushed through legislation, much to my kids and a lot of their peers' disappointment, is that kids in the state of Arkansas now have to show new account users. If you're over or under the age of 18, you need parental permission. We know the dangers that are associated because there's so much data on social media, but that doesn't even begin to scratch the surface on all the other technology that exists out there and the safety pieces of that. But I think that's one area where we certainly have to be paying much closer attention and taking a much more active role. We've seen teen suicide, anxiety, depression skyrocket over the last several years, in large part due to exposure of social media and technology. This is where parents have to step up and start getting a lot more engaged, knowing what is happening in their kids' bedroom when they're on the phone. I mean, you're inviting every bad actor into your kid's room when you send them in there with a cell phone and a computer that has no safeguards on it. And so looking for ways that we can provide that protection, I'm going to be all for all day, because like I said, I have 3 kids that are in this emerging technology age, and I'm constantly having to learn the new pieces and the new things to protect them from. But I think you're right to start having the conversation, and we're going to need people like you who actually know what all those other things do, be at the table and help say, here are some places where we really need to lean in and put additional safety and precautions in. And again, that Roomba thing, I'm totally supportive of you. I'm a lot more comfortable with the Roomba than the chat stuff, so I understand it better.
Well, and if I would add to that, just even for teachers now dealing with students being able to cheat, they can get a chat robot to write a great essay better than anything that they could ever turn in. So the reality is students are inundated with information, teachers are inundated with information. That's a skill that needs to be developed on how do you validate information. Just because you Google something doesn't mean it's accurate and that's the right information that you're trying to do to solve a job. But the reality is workforce needs are changing, and technology is absolutely going to change those needs. I was at Kroger the other day. Some people were checking out with a cashier. I went to self-checkout. I'm still uncomfortable with that, trying to figure that out. But if you look at a workforce needs demand in kind of what you would say is on-the-job site training, if there's less people hired to check people out, what's being created is someone still has to fix that technology when it breaks, because technology breaks. And I think while we're having these conversations at looking at this streamlined system, there's been a really large focus on what's called STEM initiatives, science, technology, engineering, and math. And a lot of folks have added kind of an A in there, and they call it STEAM because the arts plays a big part of that. And as fast as you can computerize something, as fast as you can artificially intelligence, those robots, those computers can't work together in a group. They can't problem solve, and they can't create. And so we got to look at just how do we help students be creators of content and not just consumers. So to your point about the vacuums or whatever those iRobots are that roll around, like if you're going to the store to buy a toaster, there's robots that can figure out how to give you the most efficient toaster and make your toast toasty and do that in an efficient manner. But when you're picking it out, if it doesn't match the rest of your kitchen, you're not buying it. And that's where the arts comes in, and that's where the creative space, and there's some theories that people that are more artistic and creative are going to be in higher demand, because you can create all the product you want, but you won't be able to sell it if you don't have that aesthetic piece. So it's really a balanced approach.
I think, just to piggyback, I think one of the other pieces is why this legislation is important in some cases, because it provides more flexibility at the district and local level. because we have to meet what the demand is, and it has to be industry driven. If we go out and we build a workforce of 100 welders, but we only need 50, well, then we've screwed up. So there has to be a good collaboration and a good partnership, and it has to be led by what the demand is. And so creating flexibility within our education system, which is one of the things that was really important in the Arkansas Learns legislation, I think is key, because we are in an ever-changing society of what that demand is. So giving that flexibility is going to allow us to meet it a lot faster. We promised to come back over here. Secretary Oliva was going to skip you, but just take note, I came back.
So I have a two-parter, if that's okay. So I would like to know what the bill addresses to address hiring and retention of teachers, because I think many school districts are having to hire those with subpar credentials, and that's only hurting our kids in K through 12. So that's the first question. And the second, I know it raises the minimum, I don't know what the minimum was in the bill, but
36,000 originally.
36, okay. Does that also go towards, what about teachers that have been in the field for 15 plus years?
Sure. I'll jump on that and then you can come in. So I think there are several things that the bill does, both to recruit and retain some of the best and brightest teachers that we have serving and that we want to bring into the profession. One, we've taken Arkansas from being 48th in the country in terms of the minimum salary at $36,000 base salary for a teacher up to $50,000, putting us in the top 5, and when adjusted for cost of living, at the very top. Making us not only able to recruit but retain. That impacts, I think, close to 60% of the teachers across the state of Arkansas will see a significant increase because of that minimum salary going up. One of the other things that we've done, all these things are fully funded by the state in perpetuity too. There's a lot of information out there that says this is a 1-year or a 2-year coverage by the state, and that's simply not factual information. The state is on the hook to cover all of the increases for teachers. So we go from $36,000 to $50,000 at the base pay. In addition to that, every teacher, if they're already above $50,000, will receive at least a $2,000 increase in their salary. So every teacher in the state will be rewarded through the Arkansas Learns legislation for their hard work. A couple of other things that are part of the legislation that also help recruit and retain. Additional funding for teachers taking maternity leave. I'll let you give the specific details on that. And then there's another $10,000 in specific, I think a lot to our veteran teachers, $10,000 in additional opportunity for teachers to receive bonuses going into high need, high demand areas, as well as being willing to serve in some of the harder to recruit areas for teachers to go into. That $10,000, as well as growth and achievement for individual teachers, which a lot of times you're going to find in our veteran teachers, they're already succeeding, and now we're actually going to reward them for what they're doing. One of the other things that I think is really important in this piece of legislation that is often ignored right now, one of the things many people don't understand and don't realize is that the state is already, every single teacher in the state of Arkansas, the state is funding, this is before Learns, before we're adding on top of this, $73,000 in salary, in benefits, and insurance. And that goes to the district for them to allocate that money to the teachers. And they have the flexibility to make that decision. But now it's tied that 80% of the money that comes from the state has to actually go to teacher salaries. It can't go to a building. It can't go to other things. It has to go to teacher salaries. I think that is a critical key piece of not only recruiting, but also retaining the best and brightest. We know our teachers work hard. I think if anybody ever questioned that, any parent over the last couple of years that had to homeschool their kids for a couple of months because of the COVID pandemic, found out real quick just how hard it is to be a teacher. I know in our homeschool, our teacher had a student revolt pretty much every single day, and our kids were storming out in protest. And I learned very quickly that I may not be qualified for being in the classroom on the daily basis. We want to reward our teachers. We want to help provide them with the resources, the training, and the incentives that they need to continue to do their job and do it really well. And we feel like we did a lot of things within Learns to help address that.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, the research is really clear. The number one impact on student outcomes and students being successful is the teacher standing in front of them each and every single day. What Learns does is it not only invests in raising those base teacher salaries to try to recruit more teachers to come to this profession. If you talk to any superintendent and ask, what are some of your biggest challenges? Something along the lines of talent acquisition, making sure they can recruit, retain, and hang on to some high-quality teachers is always going to be probably at the top of their list. It also invests in the professional development, but there's kind of a dialogue that says, but it doesn't do anything for veteran teachers, and I'm glad you asked that question, because it's important for everybody to know that we value experience. We value advanced degrees and credentials. We know that those folks make a difference. I was a brand new teacher one year. I remember my first year, I had a teaching assignment. I was teaching a special education classroom. I was assigned a mentor teacher. I would have not survived that first year without a mentor teacher that had been in the industry or been in the teaching role profession for many years. Come and check on me every day and make sure I had what I need. Veteran teachers oftentimes know the students, their families, the community. Sometimes they've taught students of students that they've had, or students of students of students. So we want to make sure that they feel valued in this process, which is why we made sure that everybody got at least a $2,000 raise. What's important to remember is the school district budgets that they typically receive, they get their what's called foundation funding, and they have like a matrix and different categoricals. They still receive that funding, and that goes through a different process. The dollars to raise the base teacher salaries up to $50,000 minimum or guarantee at least $2,000 came from a separate pot of money in the state budget. It was a separate request to the legislature to say we want to incentivize those dollars here. So the district still received their funding there, which created a different opportunity for them to determine at the local level what are the needs that they need to identify, and how do they want to compensate and recognize experienced teachers, whether it's through years of service, whether it's through advanced degrees, or even hard to staff areas. A lot of superintendents here would say it's really hard to find a physics teacher at high school. So maybe they want to do something different for that position or for that educator. This gives them the flexibility to determine a local salary schedule that works best for their community. So I want to be clear. We value educators, especially years of experience. My message, my approach, I think, would be to the governor and the legislature a little different. It would be thank you for investing and raising teacher salaries at the most historic level that we've ever seen. And we know this is a multi-year process. How can I work with you in year 2, 3, and 4 to make sure we can get bigger dollars going up for more experience? And classified staff, too. It takes an entire educational family to make the system work, whether it's in the cafeteria, whether it's keeping the buildings clean, transportation. To me, it would be thank you, because we got to start somewhere, right? This doesn't just happen overnight. We got to work with the legislatures. We got to be fiscally responsible. And I'm always going to advocate for more of that state budget's pie to go towards education each and every single time we go into session.
Just to add a couple other things that I think tack on to helping specifically for veteran teachers. One of the things that used to exist that this legislation got rid of is there used to be a 15-year cap. So once you hit 15 years, you had reached the max, and we got rid of that cap. So now your 16, 17, 18-year veteran teachers actually can receive more money if deemed by the district. They have that flexibility, and before they didn't. And so that's another way to help some of those really long-serving veteran teachers as well. Anybody else?
One other thing in that is I was just thinking there are so many things for teachers in that bill for veteran teachers, and one of the other things, Arkansas has a program currently that if you graduated college 2004 or later, you can apply, and the state of Arkansas will repay your federal student loans. And we doubled the amount in that fund for teachers to be able to apply to have their federal loans paid off. There's also an additional fund set up, and I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's for teachers coming into the profession, and even teachers that are continuing their education and teaching in a geographically underserved area or a subject matter area that's hard to hire. So if you're getting your bachelor's degree or a master's degree, then the state will also repay those loans. if teachers apply for that. And so that's new. The other program already existed, but we doubled the amount of money in that fund for teachers to apply for. So we certainly are supporting continued education and advanced education and educators across the state. And we're helping pay off those loans of those teachers who want to further their education. And then you had a question. I'll come over to you. Yeah.
We'll come over there next.
Several of our Delta school systems are among the worst performing schools in the state, and historically it's been that way for a very long time. So what would be your thoughts, what would be your plans for helping change that situation?
Well, I think there are a number of pieces. Some of that is and I'll list off a couple and let Secretary leave it. I think one of the most important things, and I mentioned this before, is literacy. We know that if a kid is not reading by the time they hit that most basic benchmark in the 3rd grade, then we are setting them up for a lifetime of failure. I think one of the most startling statistics that you can look at when it comes to that is that 70% of the incarcerated here in the state of Arkansas can't read. It is a very telling data point that we know sets kids up for either a pathway to failure or a pathway to success. So investing aggressively, particularly in areas like the Delta, in early literacy, early access to pre-K and things like that are going to make a long-term difference. The 120 reading coaches that we will deploy from the state, I would imagine that you will have very concentrated numbers of those individual reading coaches going into those districts because those are going to be the lowest performing, hardest hit areas. And so really saturating them with additional resources to catch up in that one specific area can make a huge lifetime difference for each of those students. I think another great example, and one of the things that this legislation did that we have already seen go directly into effect and really impact, is the Marvel Lane School District. That was on the brink of closure just a couple weeks ago, but because of the LEARNS legislation, that district is staying open and working with the state and a third-party vendor to make the corrections and get on a long-term sustainability plan for that school. Instead of just immediately going either under state control or shut down, they now get to partner with a third-party operator to help build a plan that allows them to stay open and work with the state. And we saw that happen last week. And I mean, elated cheers from around the room, and that's a very specific place in the Delta that's already been directly impacted by this piece of legislation. And Secretary Leave, I know, go into detail on a few more other things, but I think those are some of the key early components that we know will have a direct impact quickly.
And we know that the LEARNS bill is comprehensive in its approach to supporting schools. I think personally, when you look at what that minimum teacher salary does, especially for being able to recruit in the Delta, that's significant as well, because I want to say there's about 6 districts currently right now where not one teacher makes $50,000 a year. So when you look at what is that going to do to the Delta, and especially our small and rural communities on kind of an economy of scale, if disposable income goes up in all of the households across the boards, it's very likely that the small and rural businesses in those regions are going to feel the impact of that as well. So there's a little bit of an economic factor, but I can tell you, it was probably, it might have been my first week here, I'm not even sure, but Governor Sanders took me to some of the school districts in the Delta to say, we got to make sure we have a vision, right? We can't just piecemeal a plan. We got to work on a strategy for this entire region, and what does a 5 to 10 year investment look like? And we had some stakeholder meetings with community members and superintendents and principals and legislators to talk about what does this look like. And some of that conversation directly from literally my first week on the job was in that bill. And I think one of the really shining parts of the legislation that we don't get talked about a lot is that there's dollars for a Grow Your Own program. You know, one of the things that we heard pretty clearly from that region is a lot of people aren't moving here, or if they are coming, they're driving in and out. How can we take the residents that here and build them up to be high quality teachers or principals or work in the school system? So there's a Grow Your Own program in there where we're going to start working with high school students now and identify students that want to become teachers if they make a commitment to coming back and teaching in the area or a hard to staff subject area in their region, they can get all of their tuition and books paid for. So we've got to invest in the talent that's there. Upskill is kind of the term that the career and technical education folks use, is to say, how do we invest in the families that are there and get them to want to go to a high quality profession that is revered. And we want to make sure when we talk about teachers that they're valued in our state, and it's a valued career and profession. One of the things that disheartens me oftentimes, and I know it's a tough job and it's challenging, but often it's very disheartening when I'm meeting with teachers or stakeholder groups and I hear teachers say, I would tell my children never to become a teacher. That has to change, and that's why we're here. That's why we're investing in high quality legislation. That's why we as a community, that's why the businesses can lift up this profession. We all have to lift up and put our teachers of the year, that are here on a pedestal and say, we value you, we cherish you, we want to invest in you. And that's going to help us build that pipeline of talent so that we can keep growing this profession.
Governor, Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. I had the privilege of working on and being a member of the Workforce Development Board several years back. And what you said a while ago, Governor, was exactly right. You've got 6 areas and none are communicating together. As we go into the training, into the skills, there are many corporations that I had found when I was mayor that has the academia, that has the training programs, and are willing to share that with the state, which would save the state many dollars. And a fine example of that is in BB with the John Deere, as you well know, on this campus. When I was teaching at Lyons College, the same thing with Ithaca, New York, IBM, come down and provided all of that for Eastman Kodak, and I can go on and on. It's just simply going and asking and calling on these folks to ask for their help. And so I commend the program, and I think you're going the right way on that. But the kids also need to understand that they need this K through 12, even though they're not going to the secondary education and are going to go to work someplace else to get a skill, that they still need this back in the back. And that's something that they say, well, I'm just going to skip this and I'm going to go on. And that's not the case. But anyway, I'm glad to hear that you are going to do that.
I think you are exactly right. One of the things that I found, and I won't name names because I don't want to embarrass anybody, but it wasn't here, but it wasn't very far from here. I had just toured one of our community colleges that literally shared a parking lot with a manufacturing business. And I was asking the owner of the business, what's your biggest challenge? What are you trying to deal with? You have all the resources and things you need to continue to grow, expand, stay here. And he said, what we really need are welders. We don't have enough welders. That's holding us back. And I said, well, did you know that the school that you literally share a parking lot with has a welding program? He was like, no. I said, how have the two of you never talked? And so I grabbed the head of the community college. I grabbed the business owner. I said, can you please exchange business cards? And when your business grows, I want you to bring me back because I want to come for the ribbon cutting of the expansion of your facility. But it's a lot of times just bringing the players to the table. And so often we are not working in collaboration with one another. We aren't bringing all of the stakeholders, the business owners, the community, the educators, all to the government, sitting at the same table saying, we know what our problem is, and let's build a plan together on how we're going to get to the solution. And that's what we're trying to do. That's what I think that we have accomplished with Arkansas Learns. And it's one of the things that I think by making it a priority through that workforce cabinet, tasking one person whose job is every single day to wake up as the chief workforce officer and say, how are we meeting the workforce needs of the state today? That's all his job is. He came from the private sector. This is what he has been doing for the last 30 years. He knows how to build a workforce, and now he's bringing all the players to the table. And I'm really excited about what I think that can mean for the state of Arkansas. I'm very hopeful because this is not a challenge that is unique to our state, is that we can be the blueprint because no one has figured it out yet. And I think we're on the cusp of something really special when it comes to dealing with the workforce shortage here in the state of Arkansas. Do you have any other questions over here or
A question? Yep.
back here, Jay?
Hi, thank you. You elaborated on this earlier about early child care. So where does early child care providers, owners, fall in this whole scheme of things? I am a provider here in Jonesboro.
So I thank you for being a provider here, and we need to scale more providers like you. We definitely need access to high quality early child care programs. But right now, and you've probably seen a little bit of this as a provider, is depending on the program that a student is, depends on the funding that they receive, which depends on the agency that oversees them. So we're now going to be under one department as Department of Education, and we're going to create programs around students and not funding. And when we flip the narrative, which makes LEARNS, I think, one of the most progressive accomplishments in education for being innovative, is it's 100% focused on students and not systems. And in the early childhood care space, it's been fragmented, and we've protected systems, and we're going to break that apart so that we can make our access to you more efficient and the resources for you more efficient, and for your ability to know how students are performing more consistent.
Probably time for maybe one or two more questions. We'll go. You guys had your hands up first. You get to be the lucky winners. This will be where our careers go in the tank too, Jacob. Right.
Governor Sanders, Mr. Oliva, one of the things that I'm the superintendent of the Brooklyn School District. We are blessed to be a growing school district, but along with that blessing comes challenges. And two of the biggest challenges, one being that this year we have to hire 12 new teachers that weren't on our salary schedule in the past. And so that adds a burden in. All of them won't come in at $50,000, because we want the best for our kids. And the second challenge is we have to build a new building, which currently it's at about $425 a square foot to build. So how are you going to address both of those? One is unforeseen consequences, and the other is something that we really need to look at and get fixed on the building side.
So it's good. It's a good problem to have, right? If families are moving to our area, moving to our region, one of the biggest challenges you face is that students don't come to you in perfect packages of 20 at one grade level, so you can hire one teacher. So when you're growing, you're going to see that all across the board. So the funding tied to the student, when you take that annual snapshot for the base student allocation, or the categorical funding or that foundation funding, they would be captured in that. The reality is you're going to have to add more teachers to cover that, and if we keep your current kind of teacher salary allocation flat, you're going to have to come up from local funds to offset those differences. So as we go from year after year, we need to use real data and make those allocation pivots and changes as we go through the process and work with the legislature, because the last thing we want to do is have an unintended consequence. We want to be able to recruit high-quality teachers here, but not also handcuff you with some of the decisions that you have to make. So those are real challenges and issues that we're going to continue to have to work with over time. The cost of construction is real, and right now there's some rules. I don't know if it's rules or state regs that really limit. It's kind of set at I want to say $200 square foot calculation, and the reality is, depending on where you are, you're hearing anywhere from $300, $350, $400 per square foot for a commercial building. So there's even districts that have started projects, and the cost of construction in the middle of projects have skyrocketed through supply demands and just some of the challenges in the construction industry. So I know we've worked with the legislature and look at the rules to try to create a formula to help address that. I'm not 100% sure where that landed, but I know that's definitely on our radar, and we can follow up, and if there's more specific nuances, to have that conversation.
And I'm looking over here in the corner because we have our numbers people here too, but correct me if I'm wrong, we've already given more allocation for facilities funding and done that for the next couple of years so that there is potentially more money available because of that issue that so many schools are running into. So after, we'll connect you with these guys who can help on that process. It's not an easy problem. But the good news is, as the secretary said, you're growing, which is a good thing, and we want to be helpful in that process. And certainly on the building side, that's one of the challenges that everyone's running into, that infrastructure component. The cost of everything is skyrocketing, which makes it much harder to build new facilities that are needed by a lot of the schools across the state. And that's one of the reasons we tried to allocate money ahead of time for a couple years down the road instead of just one at a time with some of the surplus funding that we had from this past year. I think it was somewhere right in here that we'll come back over here, I promised, right here, and then we'll take you guys before we go, I promise.
So you previously said that you were going to continue funding for the minimum $50,000 and the $2,000 raise after the first year, so that would continue year after year. So as a school board member, I was thankful to hear that, because budgeting for that is extremely difficult, especially for a lot of the smaller school districts. But I think what we are seeing the most negative comments about on all of this are our veteran teachers, like you talked about, that have been teaching for 20 years, and now, you know, they feel like basically it's an insult for them to get a $2,000 raise. They're going to make $2,000 more than a brand new teacher. And so they feel like the 20 years that they have put in and all of the experience they have has basically just been overlooked and it's for nothing. And I know you kind of mentioned maybe something in there with some steps after 15 years or something. So is there money allocated in there for these veteran teachers who have master's degrees and 20 years experience, more than just $2,000 over a one-year teacher?
Well, again, I think one of the things that we do on a state level, and again, this was before the additional funding for teacher salaries that came with LEARNs, we give roughly directly from the state about $73,000 already per teacher in salary, benefits, and insurance. The district has the flexibility to make decisions to reward their veteran teachers, and most do. The majority of districts across the state already do that. We don't anticipate that changing. One of the things, though, that we are putting in place is that 80% of the money we give has to go directly to teacher salaries, which I would imagine helps those veteran teachers in large numbers. We've also removed that 15-year cap so that if you are a 20-year veteran teacher, you have the ability to make more money because we've taken that cap away that used to exist at the state level and given more flexibility to the district.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's important for school districts, so we can follow up too if you're working with your district as a school board member, is your foundation funding wasn't impacted. In fact, it went up, I want to say 2.5 or 2.7%. So that's your flexible dollars. There was an increase from the legislature in your flexible dollars. What was funded to meet the LEARN salary increase was paid for from a separate part of the budget. So as a school board member or working in your community, you need to determine how much flexible dollars you have and then come up with a salary schedule if it wants to be years of service. Some districts are doing that. Some are looking at impact data. Some are looking at hard to staff areas. They're looking at what their needs are in their school district to take, how do I take these flexible dollars and incentivize or recognize our veteran teachers, or maybe they're doing through supplements, or there's just plenty of different opportunities to be creative. So I think that's why I go back to step one would be thank the legislature. This was a huge win for educators to get this minimum up. If we just followed the current salary schedule, which all those teachers were on, nobody would have got a $2,000 raise. So everybody's getting a raise. I think step one would be thank you. And then step two is how can we come back to working with the legislature and the community to see if we can increase those flexible dollars so that we can continue to do more and continue to do more and continue to do more.
Matt, sorry. Another thing too, you know, when we talk about the buckets of money, we talk about the money that we're giving to bring teacher salaries up to $50,000 plus the $2,000 raise. But another thing we're really not talking about is the matrix funding and the increase that we gave to that. And that was a 2.76% increase, which is the second largest increase to matrix funding in our state's history. And that's traditionally, that is where schools are taking the money and doing their salary schedules and having step increases for their teachers. So we've increased, apart from the money that we're paying for salaries in perpetuity, we've also increased the matrix funding, the second highest that we've ever done in our state's history. And that's where districts have the flexibility to make their salary schedules and decide where they want to have those step increases and how they want to reward those teachers based on that, just like they do now. It'll just be higher because we're starting teachers at 50,000. And I think it is interesting, the number of teachers, you said some veteran teachers that have maybe been in the classroom for 20 years are going to be making $2,000 more than a starting teacher. But I think that just shows that we have teachers across our state who've been in the classroom for 20 years and are still not making $50,000 a year. And they are working evenings, they're working weekends, they're working summers. Like, they are working so hard for our kids, and they're in the classroom for decades, literally, and still not even making $50,000. So if you look at what this is doing for teacher pay across the state and disposable income in rural communities across our state, like we talked about in the Delta and other places, you're talking about a substantial increase to household incomes that are not just going to matter to those households or those teachers, but it's going to matter to those small communities across the state. It's going to matter to those small businesses that are striving to stay open in these rural communities. It's going to matter to the kids because teachers are staying in the classroom. So I think there's flexible ways for districts to make that salary schedule based on matrix funding increases they're getting, in addition to the additional funding just for starting teacher pay and the $2,000 raise.
I think it's important to note that the money that existed for teacher salaries, as Senator Davis said, that matrix went up, and the money for raises is coming from a separate account on top of what districts are already receiving for teacher salaries. So it is new money coming that is fully funded by the state in perpetuity for that base salary as well as the $2,000 increase. So no one is prohibiting anybody from rewarding veteran teachers. In fact, we're hoping that that continues to be encouraged at the district level by giving them more flexibility to reward those individuals. Yes, ma'am. We'll go.
I haven't heard anything. Sorry, I have a really loud voice. I don't think you need that. I'm an administrator at a regional Christian school in Jonesboro, and I guess what I'm asking is, how is this going to affect Christian school? Because obviously we're not going to get the $50,000 raise, and the gap already from public school and private schools is pretty large, and so we have some amazing teachers that work really hard, and they don't have that ability to get that increase. But also, we talked about the loan forgiveness for teachers that apply. Would that be available for private school teachers? And then the accountability part. Obviously, as a Christian school, we want to keep our religious freedom. That's very important. We want to know what that accountability is going to be, and how you're going to, and how it's going to impact Christian school moving forward.
Well, I think it's really important to note that a private school has the ability to opt in. They aren't mandated to participate in the program, whether or not they want to take students in. That is an option that they have. With that, though, the accountability would have to mirror, there would be state standards set that you would have to meet, agreed upon standards, because if the state is funding and putting money in there, we want to know that we're meeting those basic benchmarks. A lot of the private schools across the state already do that and already have that state standard. And so that accountability metric is already in place for them to be able to participate. Whether or not you decide to opt in, that's a decision for the school. But one of the things that I think would help is if you do opt into the program, you could see additional students coming to your school that wouldn't have been there otherwise, that are funded through education freedom accounts at the state level, which would be additional funding for you to determine whether or not, I mean, obviously it adds students to your student body, but it would provide additional funding that you can use to pay your teachers more to be more competitive with some of the public schools. But public schools are traditionally always going to pay their teachers better than private schools. There's a huge discrepancy between the two.
Some of the accountability components, we're going to go through that first, especially for schools that want to participate in developing the application process for families that are looking for those options. And that's, as we go through the rulemaking process, if we had to kind of prioritize where we are with which ones that we want to take to the state board the quickest, that space is definitely where we're headed the quickest, because parents are making decisions about where they want to send their children now. So we're going to be announcing, hopefully by early next week, who's going to be on those work groups and start getting those teams together. And one of the things that we should have shared is we've established a website or a portal that houses all of this information, all of the updates on LEARNs. You can get through our agency's website, all of our reports to the executive orders, who's going to be on the work groups, where we are with the rules making process. We're going to do that. And, even kind of your ideas about private school teachers being able to participate in loan forgiveness programs. I think those are valuable ideas that we should investigate to see if there's feasibility. So we definitely. Mm-hmm.
I think you may be our last question. We'll go to you too. Since you cheered the loudest when we came in. And
You can close it.
if you hadn't, we would have closed it here, but we reward enthusiasm around here, so.
First of all, thank you so much for coming to have this conversation with us today. One of my favorite things about LEARNs is the commitment to no indoctrination as a parent of students in the public school system. But what I want to know is, how do you plan to accomplish that?
Sure. So on the very first day that I took office, in addition to the workforce cabinet executive order, one of the others was to task our wonderful secretary here with doing a full review and assessment of all of our programs, our curriculum, training, to determine where we had kind of indoctrination pieces. And that's what we're in the middle of that process now. I'll let you speak to more detail about that, but that's the first step, is seeing what exists and what we need to do, what determinations and changes. And then we also put into the Arkansas Learns legislation banning all things like CRT, indoctrination, teaching and training. And so the secretary, that'll be a big part of what they're doing in that review and assessment, in addition to some of the rules process that they're going through right now.
Yeah, and I would add to that too is that if we're talking about parent empowerment, if a parent has concerns about a lesson that their child is working on, I would always start with the local level at the lowest level. Start with the teacher and say, hey, I'm not sure what this is. Can you tell me how this was presented? Because we want to make sure students are learning multiple points of view. They're learning different perspectives. They're being taught accurate history. They're not having somebody's opinions pushed on them. And if a parent feels like that's happening, start with the teacher. Start with your school counselor. Start with your principal. Talk to your superintendents. They want to resolve this. If they can't, then you can call us and we'll get involved. What we're working with school districts now is kind of rolling out those assurances and kind of things that we would say, these are things that we need to make sure we do a little bit better job looking at and making sure they don't violate any rules. Definitely on the professional development side, some of the frameworks, some of the even pedagogical coursework that we're seeing in some of our teacher preparation programs, I think there's opportunities. I'm not saying that this is critical race theory being taught, but I have definitely identified some topics that, if not taught appropriately, could lend itself towards indoctrination. So we need to find out why these things are being taught and how they're being taught. So we're identifying those. And even with professional development and training, if we're using especially state or federal dollars and it runs to our agency and it's having teachers participate in mandatory training, we're going to put systems in place that review the content. And if we see something that, this is a little concerning, we're going to get clarification assurances from those providers that they are not violating Arkansas law.
All right. Save the best for last here.
100 years.
100 days. 100 days.
100 years.
I know they say you age in dog years in government, but not quite to the 100-year mark. That's okay.
First of all, a shout out to the school. They are awesome. But as a parent, I want to know how my child is not going to get lost in the system. When he does those tests that everybody does, he's in third grade. We got a letter home that said he needed special help. And I'm a very outspoken person, as you can tell. And I met with the school and everything, and come to find out he was colorblind and had dyslexia. And they have done an awesome job with the 504 program. And my son is thriving. He is straight A's. That school is awesome and it keeps growing. But how are kids not going to fall through the cracks? Because if it was a parent like me that is very outspoken, that child was in a special ed class and there's something wrong with that. But my child is very bright.
I think that's one of the reasons that some of those early assessments are so important, is so that we can see where we need to lean in and help those kids. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do through like the literacy program and other things, are those early assessments so that we can help put kids on a pathway to success. We're big believers that every child can learn, and it's the other reason we want to provide flexibility so that a parent does have some buy-in and that they can make the decision about how and where their kids can best be educated. A one-size-fits-all approach we know doesn't work. What works in Jonesboro may not work in Little Rock or Texarkana or El Dorado or Bentonville. And so we have to provide flexibility to our districts and to our schools to meet the needs of their student body. And then we have to empower parents to make decisions about where their kid can best be educated. It may be another public school within your district. It may be a private school. It may be homeschool, but we have to provide that flexibility. And that's one of the things that we really tried to zero in and focus on in the LEARNS legislation, as well as making sure that we're doing some of those early assessments so parents are better informed too when making decisions about what their kids are going to need long term.
Yeah. And your story has a positive outcome. Not every parent has that same positive outcome in their story. So there's a reality there. And you heard me talk about early identification and early intervention is the best path for getting children back on track, because we want to get students on an accelerated path. We want to get them back on track. And what LEARNS does in that K-1 kind of 2 space, which I think is exciting, and I think it's exciting for districts, they'll tell you, is it gives us the ability to put a unified coordinated progress monitoring system statewide, which is a very fancy term that says we can take a snapshot in time multiple times a year to see how students are doing. And in that, we're going to embed dyslexia screening in that progress monitoring. So right now, school districts are doing their own progress monitoring, and then they're doing their own dyslexia screening, and none of the systems talk to each other. So a teacher who's trying to get through their lesson and their curriculum might have to stop 6, 7, 8, 9 times a year, depending on their progress monitoring, depending on their dyslexia screener. If we can embed this, we can be more efficient. We can make sure that students are falling through the cracks, and then we can make sure that they get identified at an early, as early as possible, and get access to a licensed, high-quality teacher that makes sure they get systematic, explicit instruction in a 90-minute reading block.
Great. Thank you. And I want to say thank you to the entire room. Thank you so much for showing up, for letting us spend time with you tonight. A huge thank you to Senator Davis and all of our legislative partners who made Arkansas LEARNS possible, and just how hard you have worked over the last 100 days. Again, I'm a little biased because I think we did have the most successful and historic session that we've had, but that was because of your hard work and your dedication to the communities that you serve. And you saw that every single day. Each one of you sitting here, most of you I met with in my office, some of you a lot. We won't name names, but they're identifying themselves. But you advocate for the people that you serve. And we have some of the most dedicated public servants in this area, and we are so thankful for the work that each of you do. And most importantly, we want to thank the parents, the teachers, the educators, the superintendents, the school board members who are pouring themselves in every single day to the students across the state of Arkansas. Without you, none of the rest of this matters. If you are not advocating for your kids, if you are not showing up in the classroom, if you aren't dedicated the way that you are, then all of the legislation in the world that we pass won't matter if we don't have the people and the boots on the ground that are actually implementing it. So thank you for the service that you give to your community and to the kids that you advocate for. In many cases, they have nobody else speaking up for them. So thank you for your dedication to the young people in our state. And I know that if we continue to work together, collaborate together, we will take Arkansas to be in the very top. We will no longer be competing at the bottom. We will be first and second in all of those places that we're striving to get to. So thank you again for your hard work, and thanks for letting us be here tonight.